Mayor, we'll get started at 6:05. It seems like that's the time. We'd like for you just to kick off this meeting for us and then just hand it over to us, and we'll make sure we inform all the residents of what we got going on.
All right, thanks, Secretary. You guys hear me?
Sir.
All right, so first, just want to, thank everybody for joining us today. Thank Hector for putting this together, Kimley Horn for coming in today to do this for our residents. I want to welcome, of course, I see the Vice Mayor is on, some of our other elected officials, so just recognize that they are here. And of course, our resident, Mr. Jeff Zomper, for being in here. Going the extra mile to be in person, so that's awesome. I'm gonna come say hi. I'm in the back.
Old school.
Yeah, there's a couple of big questions. One of the big questions I get from residents is if I only have one shirt. The answer to that is no, I have a few of these, and that's why I look the same every time. But essentially on March 22, during the elections, there was a referendum and the town voted to move forward to allow the town to borrow up to $40 million for the undergrounding of the utilities. This price was based on the estimate that we received, or I should say the town had received before that referendum. That was the estimate for the project. Over the last year, I could say that I've been trying to work to offset some of that cost. I've met with some of the utility providers such as BreezeLine, Hotwire, Comcast to see if they can contribute towards the project. Unfortunately, those conversations, they really wanted exclusivity for services in the town, and that really kind of cut short. I know Christina, our grant writer, and Hector and his team have been working to try to get grants through Tallahassee for this project. Again, unfortunately, it's not deemed as a critical infrastructure project, but more as an aesthetic preference. So I don't believe we've been successful in that sense. But the point is that as we sit in here, we are trying to offset and mitigate some of that cost since this is going to be a large project. Where are we today? I believe, and Kimley Horn will get into that more. The project has been moving forward, but again, we started with an estimate based on something that was, on a scratch pad Excel sheet, and we really had to study the town, look at, how many driveways had to be rebuilt, how many hedges are coming out, what is the work that has to be done, and how much is this way we can build a construction document, go out for an RFP, and get an actual price. So that's kind of where we are today. We've been working with the talented team here that you see in front of you from Kimley Horn. And before I turn it over to them, I'm going to turn it over to our town manager, Hector Gomez, who is essentially the wizard behind the curtains in this town. We get all the blame, we get all the credit, but the man sitting at the end of the table is the one doing all the work. So thank you. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Manager.
Hey, thank you very much for that kind introduction. I'm Hector Gomez again. I'm your town manager. Just heads up, if you are home, if you want to participate in person, our doors are wide open. Mr. Zumper, we were able to accommodate him, and we'd love to accommodate you if it helps you get a better feel for the meeting. This won't be the first one. It's definitely one of many. And the goal of this meeting is to truly just give you a boots on the ground feel of where our project management team is with this project, give you an idea of how we will embark, or we are already embarking on this project, give you some direct just input on what it means to your private properties, phase you through the entire sequencing, and give you a projected timeline of where we will be. And I'll defer all of those questions to Kimley Horn to answer as they present. Kimley Horn is a team led by, and I'll let Brett introduce his team, but ultimately it is a team, well-recognized firm. We procured out of our CCNA firms the most qualified, and we really felt that they brought to the table something really reputable. They've worked on undergrounding for some serious projects, some new projects, some retrofitting existing towns. So I felt like they brought something good to the table that can help give momentum to this project. And I think you'll come out of that truly acknowledging that out of the results of this meeting after we go over it. We do have Randy Stokes here, our Public Works Director as well. He will assist you with some of the days as how the town will be representing the town throughout this process. We do have a resident, Mr. Zompa, and we have Irina, our Chief of Staff. So we hope we could field any questions you have. I hope this becomes a really casual conversation. So if there's any points for stopping and asking questions, we really want to feel out your questions and try to provide you the best answers possible. So without further ado, I will turn this over to Kimley Horn. Mr. Brett, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share a screen here. We have a couple of slides to go along with our presentation today. I'll leave the camera on.
That's perfect.
All right. So good evening, everyone. As you heard Hector say, my name is Brett Johnson. I'm a shareholder at Kinley Horn. I've been practicing engineering in Florida for over 17 years now. Began my career in local government, actually, working for Royal Palm Beach up in the western end of Palm Beach County. And after 7 years of working through their capital improvement program, I was looking for a new opportunity, and Kinley Horn presented that. I've been very grateful for that. It's been a real nice transition into private consulting, and I've now spent over a decade at Kinley Horn. So initially, I was doing a lot of general site, civil, general municipal type work. And then approximately 5-6 years ago, I was presented with the opportunity to get into overhead utility undergrounding. So I've been doing that for the past 6 years. It's the exclusive use of my time and what my practice is built upon at Kinley Horn. And I'm looking forward to bringing our experience and to joining with town staff to work through the town of Surfside and help meet your goals. I'm also joined today by Ryan Deckel. He's been a part of our team for over 3 years now. And Anna Langley has just joined our team last year. So we're grateful to be here. As discussed by the manager, we've had great success doing overhead utility underground at Kinley Horn. Our flagship program right now is for Palm Beach Island. That's a 10-year I think they're about $130 million program. They're bigger than you are, so I don't want that number to scare anyone, but I just use it to give an example of the level of program that we're capable of handling. That's going very well, and it's the largest overhead underground conversion program in all of FPL service territory. So we've used that program to generate a lot of rapport and trust with your primary overhead utility provider, exclusive of communications. We've also done numerous smaller projects. We don't just do municipal wide ones. We do single block, city block type things. You can envision a multi-unit development that needs to go up. We've also worked on a lot of streetscape projects. And moving into what it is that we're here to discuss, when we talk about overhead utility undergrounding, we're talking about looking at all the existing overhead infrastructure within the town of Surfside. I have photos of us for those of you that aren't able to see on the camera. I'll catch up on my slides now. We're looking at all the existing overhead or aerial infrastructure to include electrical and communications. A lot of times when people talk undergrounding, they immediately think FPL, power, but we need to bear in mind the communications as well. And the reasons that usually justify such a program as this are resiliency against named storms, everyday reliability, if you think about the power flickering during a wind gust or thunderstorm, safety concerns from accidental contact with overhead lines. It can be aesthetics, if you have a certain view or vista that you'd like to improve. And lastly, sometimes there can just be physical obstruction of the poles that you need out of the way. So with a large program like this, any or all, a combination of those factors will apply. The three biggest challenges that we're going to need to overcome as we get into this program are going to be the funding mechanisms, and we're going to come back to that briefly at the end of the meeting. We're going to need to talk about the potential for easements. Everything that you see above ground needs to have a place on the ground in the instance of transformers and other equipment. And then the biggest challenge beyond that, in our third and final hurdle, will just be coordination with the utility providers. So that's why we're here. We're here to help. We're looking forward to working with the town staff. Next section. How do we want to accomplish this? The overall brief version of how Kinley Horn approaches overhead utility undergrounding is we go out, we get a survey of the area, we'll develop a map of all existing utilities, and then we'll give that to the utility providers and ask them to provide a preliminary network design of how their proposed facilities will serve the town. We have the benefit, since the town has been working on this previously, we already have some initial designs, so we're already a step ahead in that regard. But what we'll do is we will take those different designs from your electrical and communications utility providers, And we'll generate a consolidated construction plan set that shows all the conduits for all providers, all the equipment placements for all providers, for the town to be able to permit and bid. And what this allows is for the town to control the construction and installation of the conduits and the equipment, thereby removing that level of coordination that will be required with the providers and giving us better control of the schedule. In order to accomplish this in Surfside, the town has been divided into 3 distinct areas you can see on the screen here. They're aptly named Area 1 in the south, Area 2 central, and Area 3 north. And the reason why the town is broken up and not handled all at one time is due to a number of factors. The first of which is just the general level of disruption that heavy infrastructure construction can cause. That's a tongue twister. Right along with that would be the traffic impacts that result from the work within the rights of way. And something else that needs to be considered sometimes is just the overall contractor's bonding capacity. You don't want to get a project that's so large that you limit yourself with the contractors that can come in and help get it done. For the purposes of this program and discussion with town staff, we're going to start with Area 3 North. And that may be a little bit counterintuitive, but there's a couple of other projects going on in Area 3 North. There's the alley between Collins and Harding that the town has a grant to beautify. The town's also done some work recently on Surfside Park on the very north end that they'd like to tie in quickly to the new infrastructure. And this, as you can see, this area is also a little bit smaller. We're looking to get our process underway. We're looking to optimize how we operate within the town with town staff. And by the time we get through Area 3 North, we'll be well positioned to roll that process right into the other 2 areas. So I mentioned before that we have multiple utility providers on the overhead lines. We have FPL, AT&T, and BreezeLine for your electrical, telephone, and Cat5 providers. You also have other facilities that you may notice on the poles, anything from street lights to antennas for the metering, the wireless meter reading that FPL does. And we also keep an eye out for street lighting circuits, private fiber lines, anything that's up there, because in order for those poles to come down, they have to be completely vacated. When we mention that there's going to be equipment that has to be placed on the ground, anytime that you look up and you see something that looks like a trash can on the top of the pole, that's an aerial transformer. And if you look at the photo on the left side of the shared screen here, the small green box in the back is a pad mounted transformer. That is what will replace the aerial equipment. The smaller green pedestals sticking out of the ground that look like tubes, those are the service points for your communications infrastructure. And the vault in the ground there, the rectangle, that is a junction point for communications infrastructure. We just like to point that out so that people can start to understand that what this is an infrastructure replacement program for all intents and purposes. It's called in the industry overhead underground conversion. But what we're going to be doing is building out the new underground infrastructure, converting all the homes to that new system, and then decommissioning and removing the existing overhead. In addition to the smaller equipment on the left side of the screen that serves individual properties, there will also be some what might be referred to as mainline infrastructure. In the foreground of the bottom photo is a capacitor bank, and in the background is what's known as switch or switchgear. These pieces of equipment are required throughout the town to provide the backbone that will serve the primary lines that feed each of the individual properties. So just a little bit of education and updating. This is it. When we refer to equipment, this is what we're talking about. I mentioned before that there's a potential that some easements will be required. When we look at placing this equipment onto the surveyed base map that we spoke of earlier, we're going to use every opportunity and every allowable town-owned property to place equipment as needed. We'll use rights of way, the green strips generally in the fronts of homes along the roadway, or if there's a sidewalk between the sidewalk and the road, We'll look for town-owned parcels. We'll do everything we can, but there will come a point where there'll be some of the equipment that easements will become necessary. So as we get into design, the town is going to put together an easement acquisition team. And in partnership with Kimley Horn, we will notify affected property owners and begin discussions to see how we can make that work. So to get to the part that probably most of our guests are most interested in hearing, and that's about construction impacts. So the way undergrounding is constructed is you have to think of it in stages or bursts. So what will happen, as shown in the first photo on the top left of the screen, is generally conduit will be installed. Our recommendation, though, will ultimately be up to the town's contractor or construction manager, will be to utilize horizontal directional drilling. We don't recommend, based on this being a built environment, opening up every road, the entire length of every trench. So I think it very likely that the impacts of the residents in the roads will be lane closures, it'll be drill rigs, as you can see in the photo on the left. And what they're doing is they're actually drilling beneath the ground, doing everything possible to avoid existing utilities, obviously. And they will then pull those new conduits under the ground to these junction points where they will either connect them or tie them into equipment. And then what will happen is that crew or crews will move to the next street over in the area. So what may happen is a resident may see, a lot of activity on the road for a couple of days or a few weeks, and then it'll seem like nothing's happening. But what's happened is the crew has shifted. Then what happens in the next stage is you'll see in the middle photo on the page that there's a mini excavator and there's a crew setting a transformer. It's a little bit hard to see. If my mouse shows up on the screen, it's just above the pointer. But after the conduits are in, they'll come through and they'll pull cabling and set equipment. And again, this is one of those stages or bursts of activity. And then the last thing that will happen is we will connect to the properties. And that's what most people want to know, how that happens. Usually a contractor will employ the same drilling that you see in the left-hand photo to get to the meter locations on the property. So every attempt will be made to drill beneath the existing landscape or hardscape on individual lots. You can see in the bottom right photo, there's a small hole. This is where the conduit comes up beneath the meter. And then this crew here is working on the actual conversion to the new wires, which are draped out on the ground. Now, in addition to the parts of this process that we and the town's contractor can control, there are some elements at which point FPL comes back into the picture. The most noticeable one will be that after the conduits are drilled and the equipment is set, FPL will need to help us switch all that on. That's a process controlled by them. And that may cause some gap in time where it seems like, hey, everyone was out on my property, my transformer's in. What's going on? And that's because we're working on getting the equipment energized. And then again, after the homes are converted to the new underground systems, and again, I speak mostly about power, but we're also talking about communications. Those providers will also be responsible for coming out and converting the homes to the new underground system. The last step in the process would be pole removal. So this is what we're all trying to get to. This is the icing on the cake. This is the last step, crossing the finish line, whatever cliche you want to use. This is what gets us most excited because that means a project well done and successfully completed. That again is something that will be accomplished by FPL's crews directly because at that point, as I mentioned earlier, all that equipment has been de-energized. So it's just abandoned overhead at that point. As far as schedule, our goal is to get Area 3 North, and I'll jump back to that map here. We want to get that out to bid to the construction contractors by the end of this year, 2024. We anticipate, based on how we end up procuring the construction, whether we go construction manager or low bid, we need to talk through those things still, that construction for each phase. And when I say construction, I want to qualify that to say, not just the drilling, but the materials procurement, the drilling, the cable pulling, hitting every street, getting them all done, working with FPL to power the equipment. We're looking at 2 years per area. So what we anticipate happening is after Area 3 gets out to construction, we'll immediately begin design on Area 2. And our conservative estimate on schedule at this time is that we'd like to see one area go out to construction in each of these next 3 consecutive years. If we can accelerate that, if easement acquisition goes well, if permitting doesn't have any hiccups, we could see that being accelerated, but the tentative schedule that we put forth would be one phase going to construction each of the next 3 years. And if you do that math, by the time you're in 2026, 2 years after that for construction complete, we anticipate in the 2028 or 2029 timeframe. So that completes my formal presentation, Hector. I'm happy to take any questions if there are any.
Great. What we'll do is we'll close off this slide,
Okay.
and then we'll allow it to be so we can see everyone. I want to add some points to all of this that weaves everything together. And then what we would do is I would like to take questions and answers. We want to provide you as best of an answer as possible. If we can't, for whatever reason, we don't have the answer, we will make a note to follow up with you. Mayor, as I see you here, and you're probably the closest to a desktop, would you assist us with the questions and answers as far as your hands raised?
Or if I see them, hopefully we don't have that issue like we did the other night.
Absolutely. What we'll do is I just want everyone to know a big decision we took on this project is dividing the project in areas. We feel that you do more by doing less. When you focus all your resources on a very specific area, you're able to push the easement acquisitions, you're able to mitigate the amount of money we have to loan and borrow. Why borrow everything at once and be held accountable to the interest of that loan so early on for monies that you may not use a few years down the road? So we borrow in smaller pockets. That allows us opportunities to refinance as well as we go after other loans if we go through that private process. So that was one of the big reasons. And then why the north area? Well, it's a good size to take a bite at. It has a lot of different layers, and specifically the 96th Street Park, the alleyway, and it's just an easy area to start integrating in and start to gain on some optimization and that learning curve. So that when we get to the bigger areas, we know what our lessons learned are, and we're that much more strategic with our contractors, especially as we work down to the south. I think we evaluated that the south side is actually the most complex of the entire town because of the additional permits it requires, as well as the overall square footage of property. Why the additional permits on the south side rather than the north side? Well, we have a little island, and it's Biscaya. We have to underground Biscaya. So we have to go underneath a canal or body of water. That type of subaqueous crossing automatically triggers an Army Corps of Engineers permit. So that's just one of the ideas that puts it into context. Also, acquiring easements in a much bigger area will make the project start time a little bit later on because it takes us that much more time to acquire those easements. So if we can get that head start really early on from the top side, that is the idea. So the design will always take place. It's just going to be a sequencing of from design to construction, and we phase out the design to another area, then construction of that area, and slowly phase out everything with construction at the tail end. Other points of consideration when we evaluated with Kimley Horn really early on. Prior to Kimley Horn being at the table, the big method of pursuing this project was open trench, open cut. That means opening up the roadways and installing a common trench that would house all the communications as well as the electrical. That is a very invasive and obstructive process. You have to dig up every linear footage of roadway, and then you have to go left and right to your respective properties, and then as well as to your infrastructure. We feel that we can optimize this design with directional drilling. It is more cost effective, and it is least invasive and intrusive in that nature. We will still feel it, but it will not be the same as cutting up the roadways all the way across. So I want to put that point out there for consideration, that prior to Kimley Horn, the primary methodology for this project was an open cut, open trench process. The town went out for a referendum to borrow up to $40 million. And that was before COVID. That was also before prices went up, and a few years have gone now. We have to implement certain strategies in our design to try and still deliver a project within that price range, even though the conditions of the market are not in our favor for that. So what does that mean? So the $40 million, we know what it is. We know that directional drilling will assist us with that a little bit. We also know that will help us with the restoration costs. And then we also have to think, what do we really want to underground? The original intent of the project was undergrounding existing infrastructure as well as potential future infrastructure. There are certain communication providers not in a residential area right now. But as part of the $40 million, it involved undergrounding them. One example is Hotwire Comcast. Even though they are in our commercial area, they are not in the residential area. So why pay for a utility that's not in a residential area to underground them when in some future plan they may just come into a residential area, and at that point we force them to underground. So I think we made a really strong stance with that really early on at a policy direction with passing an ordinance stating that any future utilities undergrounding in a residential area is to occur through utilities undergrounding. That means any future entity that wants to come into this market, they have to underground and they build their infrastructure. People like Hotwire Comcast, not people, but companies like them, we were going to underground their utilities, but they were not sure from a business plan standpoint if they were still going to be a service provider to the town. So if you're not sure if you're in, then I'd rather mitigate the cost and truly underground existing above ground to future underground. That helps mitigate the price. What are our existing providers? We have Atlantic Broadband, now known as Breezeline. We have AT&T, who has two types of infrastructures in the residential area, which is fiber and copper. So we have to make a decision of, do we want to phase out these copper residents? Currently, there's a few residents served by copper still. Do we want to phase them out and put them on fiber? And then lastly, it is FP&L. FP&L is obviously the if I call them the big three, they're definitely the big three. It's FPL. A lot of the wires you see out there, FPO is the ones all the way at the top, and the buckets, and a lot of the swings come into the private properties. This project, the way we're gearing it is, it does not cost the town for you to pay for a contractor to underground the private services. This project will underground the private services for each resident. That means that this project will take you from wherever it is you're being fed to all the way to your meter with full restoration. I think that's a big point. Really early on with Kingly Horn, what you've seen out there is surveying. This project prior to us here had not undergone a survey, a substantial amount of survey to truly understand what are existing conditions. You cannot put something underground without truly knowing what's underground. And the best way to know what's underground is find out as latest as possible. And the best you can do that is through a survey from a certain time forward. Utilities are going into our residential area all day. We have TECO out there. We have water and sewer from the town of Surfside, primarily those. And, we need to know what's underground so we can coordinate our design as best as possible. Through survey, we mitigate conflicts really early on, and we come up with an optimal design that can bring forth some cost savings because it helps mitigate construction conflicts that may be encountered. These were just a few points I wanted to pull out there. I thought they were very important points. I'd like to turn it over for questions and
For,
I appreciate that.
We have a question from Herbert, but before as I turn him on again, I just want to recognize our Vice Mayor, Mr. Rose, Mr. Jeff Rose. We have Commissioner Fred Landsman here, and I see Commissioner Marianne Maishat as well. So thank you for joining. And the fact that they're staying quiet is just because we don't want this to turn into one of our commission meetings. So we're going to keep it less exciting and just keep this about undergrounding. So let me see if I can. I don't think I can.
Mary, I apologize for putting you in a situation to help me with the questions. But in the spirits of this roundtable, thank you.
I'm happy to help, but I don't have control. I guess I'm a panelist, but I don't have the ability to.
Oh, so you know what? We will decommission you, Mayor, and we will take over from here. So thank you very much.
I'll sit here and look pretty. That's it.
Herbert, you're off mute.
Yeah, hi. I actually joined a little late in the session, and basically what I'm trying to find out, my house is on Harding Avenue, and I know a lot of the properties, especially on Collins, are underground. How will this affect us on Harding?
Are you on the west side of Harding?
I'm on the west side, yes.
Do you have a pole line behind your house?
Yes, we do, yes.
Okay, so that means you have aerial infrastructure. And what we're working with the utility providers to do is we will develop a new system that will provide you service, most likely from the front side of your home.
Okay,
And we don't have that put together yet because, as the manager mentioned, we're still in the surveying process. But that would be the intent. FPL's requirement is that all new infrastructure be accessible from the street. So what
okay,
you can anticipate new infrastructure on the front side of your property.
And to add
okay.
to
Yeah, 'cause
that, your house on Harding Avenue and your neighbors from
Yeah.
the backside on Abbott have a very interesting situation where your current power lines are in your backyard.
correct. Yeah.
You're the only block across the whole length that has that situation. So the
Yes,
answer is those poles and those lines will have to be removed from your backyard and put to the front. So that means FDOT now becomes a player, and we would have to permit it in such a way that now your infrastructure is in the front, as Brett mentioned.
Okay, so the lines are gonna go underground on Harding Avenue.
Yes, whether that ends up being under the road or the sidewalk, I can't say yet, but yes, that's the general intent.
Gotcha, okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Herbert. I think it's important to add, if I can, because Kimley Horn, you guys are still in the middle of the surveying process. I got a couple emails, a couple of calls. Hey, the town is trying to get into my house or into the back of the house. They didn't really know what it was. And I know that we sent out notifications about this. So just if the people are listening and you get a request from, I think the town, we have an officer or somebody that goes with that surveying team. They're coming to look at the yard. They're trying to see how the wires are set up. They're not there to look at you and judge your house for code violations. Please, if you can comply and allow them onto the property as much as you can, this will help us evaluate the project as a whole and better prepare it for construction.
Absolutely. Thank you for that.
You're very welcome.
Do we have anyone else? Mr. Zomber.
I can do them first.
I don't see anyone else's hands raised. I maybe well, I do see a few now, but there you go. Something happened. Actually, we'll field you that. Since in theory you were next.
I have a number of questions.
Please.
Surprise, surprise. First of all, I know there was a discussion that Florida Power and Light would only sign an agreement to do their work and whatever it would cost them. If we agree, if there was an agreement that certain work that we needed to do would be completed by a certain date. Otherwise, there was some discussion of whether it's a financial penalty or a benefit or whatever. But otherwise, certain monies that they were going to spend, they would not spend and would fall on us. When is that deadline? How much money is involved? Have we passed it yet? And is there similar language in the other agreements with Breezeline and AT&T?
Okay. You want me to answer that one and then, or
You want all of them at once?
no? Let me deal with this one. I think what you're referring to is the binding cost estimate from FPL. So ultimately, there's a binding cost estimate that the town enters into, where we binds us to what is the cost of the project from X point, knowing what the infrastructure of FPL is out there. Keep in mind, FPL infrastructure out there is depreciating infrastructure. So it is in a way changing as it depreciates. That binding cost estimate, we have not paid yet to FPL because they have not given us 100% drawings. So all of the utilities owe us drawings. We pay for that binding cost estimate, their design efforts, and their design efforts translate to drawings that then we coordinate for better efficiency. So we get all those designs and we coordinate. We are not at a timeline yet. Our only commitment that the town has with FPL is that as part of this binding cost estimate we're getting into, is that we have to underground the entire town. This isn't that we can only partially underground. If we, for some reason, don't, then that's what triggers those penalties, I believe that you mentioned. As they're looking at the whole depreciated value of the entire infrastructure system as it pertains to FPL. So to answer your question exactly, there will be something, it is not present yet as the binding cost estimate hasn't been finalized. The town has not made payments to FPL. We have earmarked in our budget approximately $4 to $5 million that is meant for that. But we have not entered into that engagement until they turn over the full design.
I specifically remember though a drop dead date.
Correct.
That there was a financial, either penalty or benefit attached.
There is, but that date right now is not set in stone. So there will be a not drop dead date, but a penalty date. But that hasn't been defined today.
Since the initial cost estimates, other than the restoration of people's property, and that it was done in a simplistic way in the initial estimate, what other hiccups have reared their head that with the initial design of the project?
I don't know if you'd call them hiccup, but I'll explain it as complexities of the projects. The main thing is we put in a lot of effort and cost and investments towards a estimate of probable cost so that we could put a question forth out for referendum. We came up with a number a few years ago of $40 million. And perhaps at a screenshot that was a number, perhaps it still is. But you have to keep in mind that there's certain factors that are beyond our control, and that's COVID
Okay,
and the raise of cost, rise escalations.
those I understand.
And we don't know what that means at the end yet. Scaling down the project in smaller sizes will still allow us to proceed and move forward. So I wouldn't say that that is something that's going to stop this project, but it's definitely something to consider of what is this thing going to actually cost us, considering that the $40 million from our referendum was an outdated number. We have installed, I think, certain mechanisms to be more efficient with our project. One of the consequences of that is that we did drop a potential future service provider. But that is in order to mitigate the cost. But if we're existing utilities undergrounding, then let's focus on existing utilities. We did change project management teams, but we feel that that was in the best for the project. To give you some history, we started this project with HPF Associates. HPF Associates was retained to provide us an estimate of probable cost, and that slowly developed to a project management effort with another engineering firm called KCI Technologies. We made a decision in this past year to not move forward with KCI, understanding that they did not do any design work to date. There was no design work. So we were able to make an easy, assured call that if they haven't designed anything, let's go back to the table and reevaluate how we trigger this. HPF Associates they did submit a letter to leave the town. They did not want to keep working with the town. So we had to make a firm stance that our project manager at that time did not want to keep working with the town. So let's rethink this whole project as a whole. Not lose any information we vested, because there is some work. There has been some coordination of various utilities, but that's where the project has been in the past 2.5 years. The utility providers, the individual utilities providers have been working on their designs. Now those designs will be turned over to an engineer who will coordinate those designs and maximize and optimize those designs. So the level of effort and investments were towards HPF Associates for project management substantially in that sense, but engineering effort, none. What we felt is there's a very big tie of project management of this project with design of this project. And the best way to bridge that gap to avoid that lack of coordination is put it together. And that's what we did with this project. I don't believe that slowed down the project, because the project of this magnitude, from an initial start, you're looking at 4 years before. I mean, and that's kind of an average. And I would like to say that you're looking at 3 to 4 years at the earliest before you take the design to construction. And we're still on that target. I'm using examples of specific spots within Miami Beach and how long it's taken them to underground those. Design efforts for a project this big requires a lot of coordination, and it's not something you do within 1 or 2 years. I hope that answers the question.
Yes. The biggest cost factor will probably be the change in the cost of borrowing money. But that's not something you can control.
Yeah, so interesting point on that, and sorry to, we don't know what's gonna happen with interest. I wanna make a big important point about this as we go to this project for bonding. I'll give you a peek of what we're dealing with and what we're encountering. But we are trying to determine if this project falls as a public bond or a private bond. And private funding, and the reason is, a public bond is set to underground public infrastructure. Or towards public use, public projects. Here, we're undergrounding a private infrastructure. Even though it's for a public good, it's still a privately owned infrastructure. So there's a difference between pulling a public bond for a water main or a stormwater pump, because those are public infrastructure. This is not public infrastructure.
How much is the spread between those two entities?
What do you mean as far as the spread?
The interest rate difference between a public bond and a private bond.
You have more leniency to a public bond. I think they're a little bit more tailored for them to be easier to obtain for a municipality. As far as the spread, good question. I don't know today in today's market,
Okay.
but these are the questions we'll tackle. We are gonna have, when we're ready to finance this project for construction, which we're estimating at the bare 4 months, but at the most 6, so 6 to 4 months before a shovel in the ground, a shovel goes in the ground, we will start the bonding process, which we have to procure. We will bring forth a financial advisor for this. We will do the procurement documents, we'll put it out to the market, and obviously we will retain a bank for this. But we will do that 4 to 6 months before the actual project starts.
How much has been spent or committed so far on this project?
Committed, keep in mind, you have big commitments. You have $4 million earmarked alone for the FP&L binding cost estimate we have to pay to FP&L. So earmarked and spent, you're talking about 6 to more close to 7.5 million. That's how much of the general fund has been allocated for this project, whether spent or not spent.
Right.
Spent, you're under $1 million.
Question for you.
Mhm.
The size of Royal Palms as compared to the size of Surfside, whether that being, maybe you could describe it in 2 ways. Geographic size, I know we're a small town,
Mhm.
or number of homes within the town.
Did you mean to say Palm Beach?
I thought,
You mentioned Royal Palm,
the large
the
project.
large
that-
project,
that
yeah,
you-
so Palm Beach, the municipality.
Okay.
I can describe it to you in 2 ways. Did we have, do you remember pole miles here existing? Have we looked at that? So normally what we'd like to try and talk about is existing pole miles, but I don't know because we weren't involved in the planning stages as the previous consultant. What I can tell you is that if you want to compare this to the Palm Beach program, just by number of phases, which are roughly equivalent size, you're at approximately 20% of the size of that. But if you're looking to sort of channel that into dollars, I'd be cautious about making that, because it's never just land mass, it's never just centerline road miles. It really comes down to what the utilities determine are required for new infrastructure.
That was what I was trying to do, and
Yeah.
I'm adequately questioned.
Be careful with that.
Easement acquisition.
Mhm.
I never heard that term quite in that way. It makes it sound like we have to purchase easements from the houses that we want to put something on or put something under. Is that true, or do the right of way that exists, town versus resident, just say we can do it?
When we talk about easement acquisition, we're talking specifically about what we're gonna recommend to the town, which is voluntary easements. And that usually catches a lot of people off guard. They don't consider that or even think that's realistic, but generally project budgets can't support purchasing easements, especially depending on the volume, and we'll know that more in the coming months, how many that is. So we've had much success with pairing up consultant staff and town staff and going out and talking to property owners and receiving voluntary easements to place the equipment we described.
Is there a requirement I'm not a real estate lawyer
Mhm.
or property lawyer. Is there a requirement to buy easements if people don't offer them up voluntarily?
If people don't offer them up voluntarily, we're going to look to the next best property. We've had great success in our other programs. We've received over 800 now voluntary easements in the program we mentioned previously. So it takes a concerted effort with town staff, and even sometimes the commission needs to get involved, and a lot of times it's educating people, saying, look, this is what the impacts of your property are now behind your home, above grade. Can you help the town? Can you be a good neighbor? And can you help us get this equipment down?
I would have never guessed that there was a requirement. Okay.
I want to add to that.
Mhm.
The priority of this project, what we're gonna work towards to, is maximize town right away.
Mhm.
We will install it right away, and it diffuses any easement questions. But this project will require some easements of some certain point somewhere. There's no way you underground a whole town and not have an easement. But the goal is first, use as much of the right of way as possible. So the cost of doing business of installing something in the right of way in front of, and we usually, hopefully the project doesn't line up where we install things in front of your house. It probably be more towards a property line,
Yes.
but it being there. It's better off than us trying to acquire an easement on a property. So hopefully people understand that we're really going for the less of the two evils. Ultimately, it is a box out there, but it is better than a pole. And secondly, let's install it in a right of way in such a way that it's not intrusive to your natural habitat of how you decored your landscaping, if you will.
So the easement is not necessary for that smaller spots. It might be necessary for the middle-sized spots.
Generally speaking, that's what we anticipate. We think that the smaller transformers will have a lot of options in the right of way, but we think the bigger mainline equipment will probably require easements.
Okay, just one observation,
Mhm.
and I'll be very tactful with this. It sounds like the determination was made that the previous work was less than useful. But anyway. That's just my own editorial comment.
I'll take it on. There's certain coordination efforts that had to take place regardless. You had to stay on top of FP&L to get us where we're at. You had to stay on top of the utility providers. They're more on the passive, like, because a lot of municipalities go up to them and say, we're gonna underground, but not a lot of them are serious. So you need to have that push. So a lot of the efforts, we're definitely pushing efforts to get us to where we're at, which is they are all indeed working on utility efforts, on design efforts. We didn't really expense the engineering funds because our engineer hasn't had a chance to evaluate that information. So I hate to say that. I hate to say it.
Okay, no, what you said makes some sense. Makes sense for some of what was incurred. And the 2028 is the estimate, which can change, for
2028, 2029.
for the 2028, for the completion of all three phases?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you for allowing me to ask so many questions.
Well,
I don't mean to say.
thank you. We had
Back, waiting.
Mhm.
Dropped off.
Dax, the floor is yours.
You'll need to unmute.
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Hector. I'm in one of the condo buildings on Collins, and I don't think it will, but if you can just confirm that the undergrounding won't affect the condo buildings along the coast on Collins in any direct way.
Are you on Collins Avenue, west or east?
East, oceanfront.
You are already undergrounded.
That's what I thought, but
You're already underground and you're served through that infrastructure already.
okay.
I'll just add one point for clarification is that the referendum item for the $40 million undergrounding project goes towards the assessment of everyone's property. So if you're a property owner on the east side of Collins Avenue, you will be paying for this project as well. And
Right.
that was voted on by our residents, so I just want that clarified.
And how would that come about? In taxes and
As a special assessment on your real estate taxes.
Okay. Which I
But-
guess we have yet to see.
Well, we haven't borrowed yet, so there's, I
Yeah.
think,
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. It's great. I think, and I don't want to underestimate the aesthetic impact this is going to have for the residential area as well. I think it's huge.
no, I just want clarification because some people were not aware of that, so.
Yeah, no, for sure.
And
Great.
if I could add to that, Mayor, in addition, Dax, to the aesthetic impact in the residential areas, when we described earlier that this is building a completely new infrastructure system for the town, the currently underground buildings such as yours will receive a reliability and resiliency benefit. Because if you think about, even if, say, an individual single-family home had an underground service line out to the pole, your weakest link is whatever's upstream of you. So just to try and clarify that even if your building east of Collins is already underground, the fact that now the main line and the feeder that supports your building is now underground all the way back to the town limits, you will see some benefits as well.
Okay, interesting. Great.
So
Yeah, that's awesome.
I'll invite you to ask the last question.
Okay.
But let's see if there's any more hands raised, and then we'll bring it back to Mr. Zampa. And we'll end it with him. I know there was a hand raised earlier.
One left. Oh, we have Jeff Rose.
Yes.
All right.
Hector, I heard that comment, Hector.
What's yours?
No, what I wanted to say was actually just touch base on what the mayor said. Also that the higher your assessed value, I believe, and maybe you guys can clarify this, the more you're going to be paying. So 20% of our town is primary residence, 80% is not. And I believe the way you're getting assessed is the higher your assessed value, the more you pay, not an even across the board. Maybe Hector, or you guys can clarify that, Mr. Mayor. I think you know, I'm not 100% sure.
What I'll answer is, well, those types of questions based on finance and how the impacts are to your taxes. We would like to have a special meeting specifically just for that, and keep this meeting for project management specific related items. Some of those questions, believe it or not, we don't have the answers to yet. You provided a general rule, correct? But it's to be determined. I would like to hold a special session specifically for these types of items.
Thank you guys for having this meeting.
You're welcome.
Mr. Zomper, I will
Yeah.
welcome you to close us off.
Yeah, this doesn't have to do with the cost, which you indicated would be helped. But from an aesthetic value, if you're doing the horizontal drilling,
Mhm.
and that's saving you money because it doesn't rip up then how do you make the roads look presentable and not patched after the project is done, if you're not repaving anyway?
We will embark in how we will design the roadway as a finished product. But understand that this project will have temporary patches. We will temporary patch a lot of areas for the operational of the roadway. And the truth is, there will have to be an investment to repave the whole road, or at least portions of it. But you can mitigate your footprint somewhat than having to truly rip up a whole trench across.
Yeah, you'll have bore pits, entry pits, exit pits, everywhere you have a piece of equipment across the road, you would have that patch that crosses the road perpendicular. And like Hector said, you know, those will be optimized to the extent possible. And the patches that will result will, you said temporary, but I'd call them permanent. You know, we'll require hot mix asphalt and the like for once the crews are finally departing. But if you do pursue a resurfacing program, we'd recommend treating it as a separate program, so it doesn't, you know, add to the price tag, as you might say.
That's a really good point. To add to what you said, Mrs. Amber, a trench restoration means you have to go from 4 feet, 5 feet from the point where you put that dike bank and restore all the layers of dirt all the way to the top. A pit restoration is just restoring that segment. So perhaps the cost saving is more in the restoration of the depth of the excavation, because you don't want to put something in the ground and have that sink. You have to compact in layers and come up. And that's mainly probably more of your cost savings. And we will have to make a determination of how much we want to mill and resurface. But at that point, it's just replacing the 1 inch to 2 inches of the asphalt on the top. So that's the cost saving mechanism.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, to Mr. Zomper's point, I think it's a good, it's a good point you brought up. I don't think we were including that as part of the project. And as they're saying here, they'd love to keep that off the cost, so the cost for the project stays down. But I think regardless, if you went trench or you go, directional drilling, you're still gonna have to repave at a certain point, you know? But it does, as they said, it saves money because you're not now digging up the entire street and repaving it, but just portions. So ultimately, this was something that I know you guys and our town manager thought of to help alleviate and give us some cost savings to try to make this project doable and feasible for our town.
Mayor, that is it for our presentation. Would you like to close it off for us?
All right, meeting adjourned. Can we get a second? Jeff is still
Yeah,
on.
give us something. Give us something. We're not gonna let you off that easy.
I want to thank everybody for coming out. Kimberly Horton for setting this up. These guys were here early putting this together. To our very local resident for coming out and asking some really good questions. Those that participated, those that have that interest. A lot of town staff was on here as well, and it was very educational, informative, and just please, as you can see, there's 20-something attendees with 6,000 residents. So, if you learned something today, please pass it on to your neighbors as you're talking about it. And I guess, spread word of mouth about this project and about our next meetings, so everybody can stay informed.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Thank you very much, Kimberly Horn.
Thank you.
I couldn't have a better team, so thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.